It's Andy Griffith Show time on Winzenburg on the Weekend. Mike Newell is here. Bill Jones is sticking around because they both love the Andy Griffith Show.
I just love his hair.
And Jim Clark is with us by phone from Tennessee. Jim is the author of Aunt Bee's Delightful Desserts, another bestseller dealing with the Andy Griffith Show. And Jim Clark, welcome to WHO.
Yes, good morning.
It's amazing the success of these books, isn't it, Jim?
Well, I think it's all testimony for the superb production of the Andy Griffith Show and how well they put it together and what outstanding entertainment it is.
Now, you co-authored that first recipe book that came out, right?
Right, Aunt Bee's Mayberry Cookbook, which was a complete cookbook of everything from appetizers through desserts. And we thought, well, that went over pretty well. I thought, well, what was Aunt Bee's real specialty? We thought, well, her hallmark really was desserts. So how about a book of just nothing but great desserts?
Jim, Mike Newell here. You're one of those guys who has become, in his life, totally consumed with the Andy Griffith Show phenomena. How did that happen? How did it get so much in your blood system, as it were, that you've come up with such a thing?
Well, I was born the year the show started, and I was born in North Carolina, about 50 miles from where Mayberry is supposed to be, and just always loved the show. And then came to Nashville, Tennessee, to go to college, and found some other folks there who liked the show also. We said, well, how about since we're watching the show every day, we might as well call ourselves something. So let's have a club and call it something. And next thing we knew, other people we found around campus, and then around Nashville, and then throughout Middle Tennessee, and it just kind of snowballed from there. We found people all across the country who loved the show as much as we did.
Everybody has an Andy Griffith Show favorite character. Who's yours?
Oh, that's real tough. I always try to hedge on that because it's kind of like picking a favorite family member. You like them all in different ways. And but Mayberry wouldn't be Mayberry without Andy, I don't think. I think the character Barney Fife is probably the funniest character ever on TV. But then you got Floyd the Barber, and you go down the list, Goober, Gomer, the Darling family, Opie, and they're all such great characters. I think that's why the show is so strong, is it had such great characters and relationships, and of course they were terrific actors.
Jim, let's have a philosophical discussion for a moment, because I'm a college professor and I love to think this way.
Okay.
You said Mayberry wouldn't be Mayberry without Andy, and I don't agree with that. I think when Barney left, the show went down a notch.
Well, I agree.
And I think when Andy left and they continued it with Mayberry R.F.D., it didn't seem a whole heck of a lot different than when Andy was around. I think
Andy was more of a facilitator.
Yeah, I think that's true. And he was kind of the rock, and all the crazy characters kind of did things around him, and he was kind of the one who let things happen and kind of kept some semblance of order. And he, in a lot of ways, he was kind of the same viewpoint as the audience. I mean, he was looking at Mayberry the same way that we do, I think. And
Bingo. If you were a drama professor, Jim, you would identify this as ensemble, because he is the hub of the wheel, and all the spokes. The Floyd the Barbers, the Howard Spriggs, the Gomers, Goobers, Barneys, Aunt Bees, Opies, they all relate sooner or later to the hub. And I think that you hit the nail on the head when you say that they all relate to him sooner or later, because he is the point of view of the audience. There was a great, in the early going of the Andy Griffith Show, he did not want to be Will Stockdale.
Right. They kind of had written it for him to be that way. Then they realized they had Don Knotts playing Barney, and Andy quickly realized, well, no, Barney's the one that needs to be funny. I need to be the straight man. So they kind of evolved his character.
The comic relief came from Barney, and he became the superstar of the show, a bigger show than the guy whose name was on the front door, Andy Griffith. But Andy made it clear he did not want a continuation of No Time for Sergeants, where he was the country rube Will Stockdale. He didn't want any part of that, and the producer, Sheldon Leonard, wanted very much for him to be exactly that, and boy, was he lucky that Don Knotts came along to take that comic relief a notch.
But what's really funny, though, is if you watch the pilot on the Danny Thomas show, where Danny Thomas drives through town with his family and Andy Griffith stops him. We watched that in my sitcoms class in college. When you watch that, the kids are shocked by the fact that Andy is this cheating, schemer, hick Southern country boy, nothing like what the character evolved to, the very clean-cut
That's right.
Upstanding citizen. Andy, when he was in the pilot episode of the Danny Thomas Show, really was kind of scheming. And
he was the mayor. He was the justice
That's
of the
right.
peace. He was not the sheriff technically,
and he wasn't fair.
And he was the publisher.
He was just there to get money. And
yeah, he was there to put him in jail so he could get bail money.
So an amazing
out of
change
him.
of character from the initial concept.
Although, in Andy's defense, though, in that pilot, though, even though he did kind of give Danny Thomas's character, Danny Williams, a bigger fine since he knew that Danny could afford it, he did it so that, as he told Danny, so he would feel the weight of the law a little more, because $10 to some folks is a lot of money, but to Danny it wasn't, so he realized he needed to raise the fine in order for Danny to feel the severity of what he had done. So I think that there was still justice. There was just kind of a different version of justice.
Jim, this is Bill Jones, and I have a quick question about Andy's smoking habits upon the show in the early part of the series. Exactly why did he stop smoking? Was it he just didn't quit and smoked off set, or what?
Well, I think part of it was just, I think, as there were a couple of years there, even the first season he didn't smoke that much. It's mostly during the second and third, and I guess maybe part of the fourth season that he smoked. But I think they did it because in North Carolina, being a big tobacco state, it was a natural thing, and it was natural for Andy since he did smoke. So I think they figured that was it was a realistic thing for him to do. And that was always one of their goals on the show, was to make things as realistic and believable as possible. So I think that was done for more than anything else. Just it was a natural part of Andy Griffith, and for our town being set in North Carolina, tobacco was everywhere. So, but I think again, as for the same reason they kind of dropped the Otis Campbell character, the town drunk, in later years, I think they started to become more sensitive to that in the later years, and they realized it wasn't really necessary to have him smoking all the time. So I think they kind of phased it out.
I always had him smoking on the front porch on the swing. There are a couple things where the program grew up, I think, at a couple different levels, and there was always a morality play. Opie and his relationship with the whole town, and Barney's comeuppance. How many different times, how many different ways? That was a main staple of it. I like your cookbook here, and I like the Aunt Bee's Delightful Desserts. My favorite character is Floyd the Barber, and just for those who are interested in Floyd, they have Floyd and Al's Banana Pudding, Floyd's Cabin Fever Banana Cake, Floyd's
that is so nice.
Floyd's English Trifle, Floyd's Mocha Frosting, Floyd's Punch in the Mouth, Floyd's Shaving Cream and Cherry Yum Yum, and every character's got a couple entries in here. This is really these are real recipes, though, aren't they?
Right. In fact, the trifle recipe you mentioned is from Howard McNair's family, the actor who played Floyd the Barber.
Really?
So, in fact, there are about 6 dozen recipes from the cast and crew of the show in there. We tried to make it as authentic as we could, asking them to send their favorite recipes or ones they thought would be appropriate for their character.
A trifle as opposed to a truffle.
We're talking with Jim Clark, the author of Aunt Bee's Delightful Desserts.
Hey, Andy, hey, Barn.
That's cool. Mike Newell brought these things in. That's called We Love Barney 5. Where did you get that?
Oh, here and there.
Mike has this whole packet of Andy Griffith stuff. He is a Mayberry holic. And Jim Clark, I bet you collect those kind of things too, don't you?
Yeah, over the years I've collected quite a few things. In fact, there's probably been about at least 2 dozen parody songs like that have been done about Mayberry. It's funny. It really inspires a lot of people.
Jim Clark is the author of Aunt Bee's Delightful Desserts, and Bill Jones is here, and he wants to ask about one of his favorite characters.
Well, Bill, I've got a question about my good buddy Barney. Yeah. I know you probably had an opportunity to meet him. How much like his character was he in real life?
Well, actually, it's funny also, speaking of Floyd earlier, the people on the show said he was most like his character of all the actors on the show. Howard McNair was most like Floyd of any of the other actors. He was just a dead ringer on and off camera.
God, I love it. I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, and Don Knotts, on the other hand, is exactly the opposite of Barney Fife. He is extremely quiet, almost shy in a lot of ways until he gets to know people around him. But very thoughtful man, very not intellectual necessarily. He's much different than Barney, who's always.
Now he was there this summer at your big summer get together, right?
Right. We had the Mayberry Squad Car Rendezvous up in Ohio, where fellows built a replica of Wally's filling station where Gomer and Goober worked, and Don Knotts, along with Ronnie Shaw, who was Duke Slater on Gomer Pyle, and also Arlene Kalanka, who was on Mayberry R.F.D. as Millie, were there. He does a lot of the events that our club sponsors over the years. He's probably done, I guess, maybe a dozen different reunions and Mayberry events, and it's always, of course, a huge hit. And he has his own show he does, Evening with Don Knotts, that he travels around with and does that and always sells out.
Jim, there are two organizations which serve as fan clubs for the Andy Griffith Show. The Andy Griffith Show Rerun Watchers Club, and then the Andy Griffith Show Appreciation Society, is it? And you're with the Rerun Watchers Club.
Yeah, the Appreciation Society quit operating about 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay.
Now there's just the Rerun Watchers Club. We're still going strong nationwide, or actually worldwide, about 20 international chapters of the club. But
how many national chapters are there?
About 900 and some. I've lost 950, I think we're up to about
How
now.
many members would you figure, Jim?
Approximately 20,000 who either subscribe to our newsletter or else are members of the chapters.
And the chapters are named after episodes of the show and different things in the show, right?
Well, it's funny. It started out with just character names, like Andy chapter, Barney chapter, Aunt Bee, Opie, that kind of thing, Goober. And then people started using more the common little bits of dialogue and phrases like Goober says hey, or nip it in the bud, or it's me, it's Ernest T, and things that were mentioned a lot on the show. And, of course, quickly ran through a lot of those. And now we're getting some pretty obscure kind of one-time little references on the show and little bits of dialogue that really obscure, which is kind of fun to see what people come up with.
Well, your newsletter is called The Bullet, and anybody who watches the Andy Griffith Show knows that they're talking about the sole and single bullet that was stored in the shirt pocket of one Barney Fife. Is the only bullet he ever had. My favorite number 2 character next to Floyd is Howard Sprague, who came on later in the series, and you have Howard Sprague's Bachelor Pad Punch. Now, just for the listeners out there, Howard was
Mike's automatically drawn to those drinks. Do you notice that?
Now, if you watch Andy Griffith, he was the eternal bachelor. I mean, this guy couldn't. Well, at any rate, it's 1 packet of cherry Kool-Aid, 1 packet of strawberry Kool-Aid, 2 cups of sugar, 2 quarts of cold water, 1 6-ounce can of frozen orange juice, 1 6-ounce can of frozen lemonade, 1 quart of ginger ale, and you've got Howard's Bachelor Pad Punch. Where did you come up with that one, Jim?
That was, I forget who gave that one to us. It's from one of our club members, I think, sent it in to us. And
Janine Johnson?
Yeah, she's in our Opie chapter down in Orlando. And
so most of these recipes are sent in from chapter members.
I guess about 350. I think most of them are from either just great cooks we knew all across the country, but a lot of them are from fan club people. But then again, about 6 dozen are from the cast and crew. Again, most of them aren't quite as prepackaged as that particular beverage recipe. Most of them are actually more from scratch kind of recipes.
I think it's important to know why he was a bachelor the entire show, and he might be this way in real life. He was the epitome of what is anal retentive.
Yeah.
I think that was, of course, on the show they played up at least the first season he was on. That he was really kind of still tied to his mother's apron strings, and but after a while they married. His mother remarried, and they moved her away from Mayberry. And he kind of loosened up a little bit, and in fact was even engaged at one point to Millie over at the bakery. And then
one of the classic episodes is when the men's club in Mayberry, he wanted to become a member, and his mother wanted to attend the meetings or was holding him back. But Aunt P, we've got here now with delightful desserts. She could never do pickles, could she?
That was the one thing she couldn't do. In fact, in our first cookbook, we had her recipe for kerosene cucumbers, as Barney called them. But believe it or not, there is a pickle recipe in the dessert book. Even there's watermelon rind pickles that are actually very good. We figured Aunt B couldn't do a cookbook with at least one pickle recipe, so we stuck one in here too.
She died 6 years ago, or thereabouts, 6 or 7 years ago, I believe it is. But she was really tied in to that character. I mean, it was her, although she's a very, Frances Bavier, very accomplished actor, it was the role that she locked into more than any of the others, wasn't it?
Oh, I think so. In fact, she even moved in her retirement years to Siler City, North Carolina, which she always heard Andy talk about how great North Carolina was, and she'd heard Siler City mentioned on the show, and she was there for a garden show one time, making a public appearance, and fell in love with the town and retired there. And
that's strange.
Still kind of carried on as Aunt B. She wanted to be remembered as Aunt B. She wouldn't allow herself to be photographed very much in later years because she wanted people to remember as Aunt B.
I heard she died with like 12 cats living with her.
At least, yeah.
They were in the will.
Yeah.
And her 1960 Studebaker Lark or something like that was
sold at auction for $20,000.
Wow. Aunt B's car.
I have to ask about somebody, and that's because I have a personal interest. Goober.
Yeah.
Sorry, but I interviewed him last November on my show.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Lindsey, why don't you tell us about your upbringing? Because that was fascinating to hear about how you were raised in Alabama, right?
Yes. Well, I was raised during the Depression when there wasn't much to eat and wasn't very many jobs. My daddy worked on WPA for $11 a week, and we didn't have any electricity or any inside plumbing until I was in junior high school.
Wow.
And it was just, but everybody was that way, you know, there. And so I guess I didn't know the difference.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was about 14, I hitchhiked to Birmingham and saw a production of Oklahoma. And I said, well, hey, I can do that. And I could and did.
Weren't your grandparents on one side pretty well off? And
Yeah, my granddaddy sort of owned the town, but my mother and her husband, my dad, was the black sheep of the family. So we weren't, we'd get to go to Grandpa's house. He, later on, in later years, they sent me to military school. I went to Kemper Military School in Boonville, Missouri for a year, and one of my roommates was from Anita, Iowa.
And were those positive times, like the military school experience?
Yes and no. I think anytime you have higher learning is a positive experience because you'll use it sometime or other. At the time, I didn't think it was.
Were you one of the few from your family who went on to like college education and things like that?
No, my aunts. I had two aunts that went to Duke, and one taught school, and I had another aunt that taught school, and I had an aunt that was an artist.
So among your relatives, you had well-educated, fairly well-off people, but in terms of your actual upbringing, you were kind of on the other side of the tracks.
We didn't even have a track. We would have been on the other side if there had been a track. It literally, it was rough, and I put myself through college. I went to college on a football scholarship, and I had a terrific experience a couple of weeks ago. I was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, for the Alabama-LSU game.
Right.
And 15 minutes before the kickoff, they brought me out in the center of the field and introduced me in my Goober suit.
Wow.
And 72,000 people just screamed and yelled.
Wow.
A lot of fun. Because I had gone to the university for a couple of quarters before I transferred to, I went to Florence State Teachers College, which is now University of North Alabama. And I ran out of money, and I couldn't stay. And actually, I was in your profession. I was majoring in radio.
Great.
I never made it.
Well, you have to be a bit of an actor to be in radio, I think. And, you went on to use your acting skills.
Well, I kind of figured out that if I was going to do this, I better go somewhere where they can teach you how to do it. And so I got accepted by the American Theater Wing in New York City.
Wow.
And that was run by Helen Hayes at the time. And it's also, and still is, the sponsor of the Antoinette Perry Award, the Tony Award.
And when you went there, did you have a goal in terms of the type of actor that you wanted to be or the type of roles that you wanted?
No, I was just going to, I didn't come to just work. I came to be a star.
In whatever?
Well, I knew it was going to be an all-ever.
Yeah.
The more you can do, and I think I was related this earlier, the more you can do, the more chances you are of making it and getting a job.
But what I'm trying to get at is you didn't go there thinking, okay, I'm going to play this small-town country boy. And
I didn't
have
an accent. Let me tell you, I took the courses were history of the theater. We studied German theater, the English theater, the Russian theater. The graduation play, it was a Russian play by Gogol called The Marriage, and I played Putkal Yasin in it. This whole thing is just an accident.
Yeah.
I studied voice and diction for 2 years, voice training. Ironically, my first role on Broadway was as a small-town Southern football player. I don't know why all this has happened.
Yeah. I was never more disappointed. We were getting ready to bring him in here to Grandview to our annual communication day, and after I interviewed him, I went back to the staff, the folks at the college, and I just said, there's no way I'm going to have that guy in, because he wanted to distance himself as far as possible from the Andy Griffith Show. Now, it's funny to read your newsletter because you talk about all the appearances he makes, and of course, he is probably the longest-running single character in the history of television through Andy Griffith, Mayberry R.F.D., and Hee-Haw.
Right.
He's played the same character for about 30 years.
George Lindsey.
Yeah.
But Goober got on my show, and I asked him, for instance, what it was like to work with Jack Nicholson, because Jack Nicholson was a guest on the Andy Griffith Show. And there was this pause, and he said, if you were interviewing Jack Nicholson, would you ask him what it's like to work with George Lindsey? And I said,
heard the interview. I was driving between here and Iowa City.
I would
absolutely
assume that Jack Nicholson would say George who?
But I mean, he was very curt and not easy to talk with, very short answers, and he acted like he didn't want to talk about Andy Griffith at all.
Well, that's funny because usually you may have caught him on a moody day there because I mean because generally speaking he's made his peace with Goober. In fact, in his autobiography, Goober in a Nutshell, he talks about how for years he had a lot of torment and struggle about playing the same character and always being known as Goober, and George Lindsey kind of losing his identity to Goober. And
didn't you help him write the book?
Sure did, and got to know him pretty well. You know, working. Of course, I knew him pretty well before that, but really got to know what makes him tick, I think, and really, I guess he maybe had a bad day there because he really has a tremendous heart and does a lot. Does a lot of good things. But I think sometimes he gets, hits his limit of talking about Goober, and you may have called him that day when he was overflowing. And
but see, this is one of my complaints. As I've met different celebrities, most of them know how to handle life pretty well, where they accept the fact. For instance, Mary Ann from Gilligan's Island, we had her in last year.
Yeah.
She accepts the fact that everybody thinks she's Mary Ann, and they're going to call her Mary Ann the rest of her life.
Yeah.
I've always gotten a sense from Andy Griffith that he's never been willing to accept Mayberry as his home. He quit the show when the show was number one on the air. It was the number one show on TV at the time. He has not actively participated in most of the reunions, right?
Right. He usually has particular requirements that he wants when to do a reunion type thing. He wants to be the one that's in charge of putting it on, and he's very protective of the show. So I think he hasn't done a lot of the ones that have been put on by fans and things because he wants to do ones that he's not comfortable doing live kind of stage shows. He wants to do under film, in the studio where it can be controlled like the show was, which I appreciate that.
But he has to make some peace with himself, I think. And I think you worked with Dawn Wells on her Gilligan's Island cookbook, and you can probably sense from her she's totally happy being Mary Ann the rest of her life.
Howard Morris said one time, and of course he was an accomplished comedian before he got to the program as Ernest T. Bass. He was a Sid Caesar functionary and a writer and a director. He said that when you look back at the old episodes, the one thing that bothers him, and I only answer this in reference to Andy Griffith, he looked back and he said, if we only would have done it this way, it would have been much funnier. But now they are sealed, their fate. I mean, it'll be that way forever. You can't change what has been done. And you get a little nervous looking back saying, if we only would have thought of ourselves a little bit differently, we would have done it just a little bit differently. And I think that may be Andy's problem. I don't know.
He just wants to leave the past behind.
That's right. Well, something he can't change.
Yeah, I think again he is very protective of the show, and it is something for him. It is something he did 30 years ago, and he has moved on to do the Matlock and other things.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Jim. Jim Clark's the author of Aunt Bee's Delightful Desserts. Thanks so much for Mike Newell being here with all of his little Mayberry trivia. And, of course, Bill Jones. I'm anxious to hear about Monday morning and you and Van and Bonnie.
This is Bill Jones on W8.
There he goes. Bye-bye.